Hi everyone, it's Patricia Warby of Alchemy Therapies and The Scar That Won't Heal, my book. I always forget to mention that one. People ask me, what books do you recommend? And I always talk about other people's books. And today is no exception because I'm actually doing a review of Gabor Mate's The Myth of Normal, which has been out for over a year now, but only recently in paperback. I think it came out, I think it was the beginning of May, and I've read it. Well, I'm very, very, very nearly there. And a lot of this is references at the end. So I'm just on the final chapter, in fact, which is talking about trauma-informed medicine, which is going to be the subject of my next presentation that I do for the chrysalis effect, in fact, that we need to look at a new form of medicine, which is really, I guess, where Gabor Mate is coming from. If you've not come across him before, he's a doctor of medicine in 3 different specialties. He's done palliative care, addiction, and I believe he's worked in a maternity ward, but I can't actually remember if that's me inventing that. But he's, I think, very interested in addiction. He's one of his first books was In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, which was about addiction and why it's not a choice, and why it's not a failure of willpower on the part of people who end up with addictions, as we all have. Let's be honest, we may not all be addicted to substances, but we all have addictions, okay? Whether it's scrolling on your phone or shopping or hoarding money or I don't know, all sorts of things which can be very, very addictive because all that addiction really is neurochemistry. It's just in your brain and it just gives you a reward every time you do the addictive strategy, whatever that is. He's also one of the leading lights in talking about trauma and the effects of trauma on people, and a very compassionate man, very knowledgeable, very grounded now. Part of this story is his story as well, about his sort of understanding of, despite being an expert on several areas of the mind-body connection, uh, still struggling personally because of his own history as a war child. Basically, he was I think 6 months old when war broke out in Hungary, and he was a Jew. His parents were Jewish, and he suffered. He had to be given away by his mother to a stranger because they were invaded, basically, and he, I guess, was given away in order to keep him alive, which did work. And then he was reunited with his mother a few weeks later. I think it was about 6 weeks. But that history lives on in him, and he talks very honestly about how he finds it difficult to own his own emotionality, and some of the things that happen to us automatically when we've been wounded in some way emotionally is really important to talk about. We need to have more conversations like this. And so I love the fact that it isn't only, it's probably his opus, I would say. I don't know if he's planning any more books, but so far this is collected works, I guess, of everything he knows. It starts with describing how we're interconnected, how we're interpersonal, and what happens in your brain when interpersonal connection is interrupted for whatever reason, and how disease, therefore, is very likely to ensue, because that disconnect from yourself is not just a mental thing, it's a physiological shift into degradation and breakdown, which I've talked about many times. He covers that essential understanding of attachment theory. Without going into it as a theory, he talks about the importance of it and how many children sacrifice their authentic expression of their needs in order to stay attached, because that equals survival for most children. Again, I've talked about that in separate videos, but I got it from him. He's the source. So he then talks about human development and children's irreducible needs, which is something I'm very interested in. What we missed that we didn't get, all right? Because not all trauma is overt trauma. In fact, the vast majority is not abuse or abandonment. It's the threat of loss of connection in some way. You know, maybe parents who, despite their best attempts to connect with you, don't quite get you. Maybe they, in their own confusion or anxiety, they judge you or belittle you. And sometimes it's just that they don't give you what you need, particularly as a highly sensitive person, which I am, and I'm guessing Gabor is as well. And that's by the way, that's a definite category rather than just a label that I've invented. Certain people's nervous systems are highly attuned to their environment, and that's what high sensitivity is. It's sometimes also called sensory processing sensitivity. So he talks about, without mentioning that particularly, he talks about how the importance of parenting and how that can go wrong. He's very, very good, I think, on not apportioning to blame in the wrong places, because we know that parents do the best they can, but given their childhoods, often the deficits in them from their childhoods play out when they become parents. And how kind of distress, we could call it dis-ease as well, develops, and what that does to the body. And he gives a lot of examples of different diseases and the kind of patterns he saw over and over again when working as a medical doctor. But I guess the main premise of this book that differentiates it from previous books of his is he's looking at the societal component of a distorted culture, which is definitely chiming with a lot of my current interests. I've been watching a lot of Ian McGilchrist's work and talking about left hemisphere kind of fixity as our culture, you know, that we're very disconnected from the bigger picture and from our place as part of a continuum, part of a whole, which is our right hemisphere. So afflictions as adaptations. So he's sort of looking at the way things develop as a kind of adaptation to our early environment, and how that is the way the brain has to shortcut in some ways the huge processing power that it takes to have thought, for instance, means that we often have to take shortcuts to reduce energy expenditure and make patterns of things. So if something seems like something else, the brain will jump to a conclusion based on past experience. And these kind of neural maps become the way we perceive the world. They're kind of like the way it is. We describe reality in that way. And of course, that's inaccurate. One of the chapters is called an inaccurate map of our pain. And the mind can do amazing things, but it can also make wrong turns, if you like, and create mental states which are very uncomfortable and unhealthy. Anxiety is a good example, you know, OCD, bipolar, all of those labels that we now give excess anxiety, and the adaptations to minimize the anxiety or control it in some way. Most diseases are adaptations. They're the attempt by the brain to make sense of or control the underlying driver. And where modern medicine, I think, goes wrong, far be it from me to say, I'm not a medical doctor, but I studied nutritional medicine, and I did a lot of training in physiology and biochemistry, but far be it from me to say, but symptom suppression is the way that modern medicine deals with any affliction now. It doesn't really look at root causes, and it certainly doesn't look at the psychological root causes, because that's a no-no for doctors who don't receive any training in that unless they become psychiatrists, in which case they're looking at it from a disease model. You know, what's wrong with you, not what's right with you, not what is it your brain is trying to do for you here. So, you know, it's very comprehensive, this. Part 4 is the toxicities of our culture. So then he's drawing, you know, a much wider lens than any of his previous books, and looking at conflict and racism and sexism and even trauma-infused politics, you know, looking at how the vast majority of politicians go into politics, not because they're securely attached, all right? These days, they tend to want fame and fortune for themselves because maybe the deficits in their childhoods were such that they didn't get the love they needed. And you can see that all over current politics. certainly in the UK, it's very, very evident. I'm sure it's the same where you live. And then the final part, I think, was very telling, the pathways to wholeness. And I really want to obviously cover a little bit of that, because I think it's important, and it was clearly important for Gabor not to end on a negative note and say, well, this is all wrong, everything's wrong, our culture's completely wrong. He wanted to kind of end on a positive agency, what can we do about it? So, and he includes, I think, a really interesting 5-step kind of assessment or process, which is the 5 R's, if you like. And so it's really easy to remember. Relabeling is number 1. So to notice a self-limiting belief, which usually comes up as a statement in your head, like, I'm responsible for everyone's feelings, for instance. So to relabel that is to kind of disconnect from your thought as truth and just say, oh, I seem to be having that thought. Oh, my brain is telling me this. That doesn't make it true. Okay, it just means it's a habitual thought, a conditioned response. Maybe you grew up having to be responsible for everyone's feelings, and that's how you live your life. You overgive. So it's to observe the mental content without identifying with it. And that's what I help people do when we work together, is just to pull back a little and notice what's happening. That's number 1, relabel. Number 2, I should say about that actually is you're not going to just turn that around by stating the opposite. All right. So if you feel you're a bad person in some way, you're not going to be able to just say, I'm a good person, and I'm, as he says, I'm a channel of pure light. All right. You actually have to find a way of introducing uncertainty, all right, rather than replacing it with another certainty. All right. So we say something, if we're tapping this, we would say, even though sometimes I feel I'm a bad person, I know that this may not be true. All right. And so you introduce uncertainty. And so you're, as he says, divesting from the certainty that this implicit belief is true. Now, an implicit belief is not one that you necessarily know you're running. All right. That's the definition of implicit. It happens underneath conscious awareness, because a lot of the messages you received as a kid were downloaded by a brain that was in a different state, really, in a theta state of brainwaves, where you just kind of download information without being consciously aware, and then that gets set as the pattern for your life. So number 1 is to kind of divest ourselves of that certainty and maybe introduce some uncertainty into that, and then to reattribute or reattribute, depending on how you pronounce that for yourself. This is my brain sending me an old familiar message. All right. How familiar is it? That's a question to ask yourself. All right. How familiar is this message? When you get that feeling inside, because that's what you'll have, you won't necessarily have the belief. You'll just have the feeling, I'm a bad person. I deserve to suffer. I find that a lot with people who are in chronic pain. It's a familiar message, and rather than blaming yourself or anyone else, you have to put the cause in its proper place. All right, this are neural circuits programmed into your brain when you were a child. Okay, so it's really not a moral failure or a character weakness, just the effect of circumstances over which you had no control. That statement is very profound if you think about it. It brings you into present moment awareness that your situation is an adaptation. Your beliefs are an adaptation. Your life, indeed, if you're running those beliefs unconsciously, is an adaptation to what you experienced when you were little. And it gives you the hint of response ability, all right? And the choice of response, I mean by that, not burden. The new ability to choose your response, okay? Rather than going to fixed or preordained or conditioned responses from your childhood. So that's step number 2, which we work through with people. He calls the next step refocus, all right, which I think is an interesting one. And I wonder if this is the one that he's introduced himself, because he quotes that there were originally 4 of the R's, and he added one. So it's to take time out and find something else to do when you find that your brain is running on automatic pilot. Now, when I was ill, when I was going through terrible anxiety, horrible anxiety, what I found worked for me were computer games, which is really weird because I've never had any interest in computer games whatsoever. But things that just took my mind out of rumination and overthinking and into doing something. Now, also gardening works for me. Walking sometimes, although sometimes that's not absorbing enough. But anything that involves procedure, doing stuff that you need to think differently for, because you're using a different part of your brain. And so he's saying, buy yourself a quarter of an hour, right? So get something that takes you out of your normal frame of reference for a short time each day. And this is to refocus your brain, teach your brain that it doesn't have to succumb to the old tired story, this default mode network that just goes round and round and round. And it can learn to choose something else, even if to begin with, it's only for a short while, all right, before you go back to rumination and worry. You start to train your brain, you really do. It could be a breath technique, it could be anything really that some people swear by meditation for that reason. I don't get on with meditation because my brain just still goes to the old places. Revalue, you take stock and get real with what's going on for you, all right? And you ask yourself, what has this belief done for me? Because we don't get anywhere by attacking the belief that we're running unconsciously. Because if we say, I shouldn't be feeling this, go away, I hate you, you are actually attacking yourself and your brain's intention, which is to keep you alive. It's to keep you safe, even though it's keeping you stuck. And so coming into awareness of what the value of that belief is for you is a really important step. So maybe it enabled you to explain, for instance, why you were treated the way you were. Maybe it helped you not to notice that your parents weren't adequately caring for you, which would be a disastrous awareness, all right? Because then you would feel completely bereft. So it was your inadequacy that you maybe decided was the problem. And that belief is protective when you're young, because it says, oh, it's my fault, therefore my parents are fine, it's just me, and if I try harder, I could maybe get the love I need, or I can be good and people will love me and support me. And so just being aware that it has a protective or positive function helps you not to start attacking yourself and creating this very stressful thought that all these years I've been holding myself as worthless or not good enough, and I could have or should have done differently. It's no, you didn't have a choice when you were young, all right? You had to make that decision. In the battle for survival, you cannot believe your parents inadequate. You cannot risk disconnection, because disconnection for a child means death. It's quite simple. So looking at the net value, how did it help you survive your life? What did it give you in the short term then and maybe now to believe that about yourself? How has it kept you safe in some way? And you do that without judging yourself. It's really, really key. It's not personal, right? These adaptations happen to everyone. The constellation, the personal expression may be unique to you, but the general themes are human. So there's no point judging yourself for what you could not control. And the final step is recreate. And this is where the magic happens. And this is subject of my next book, which I'm currently writing. What's going to be called Mind Magic. Someone else has taken that one. But it's going to be maybe emotional alchemy. This is where you recreate the automatic compulsive responses that you have to life situations with new networked configurations. And how we do that, well, we come into compassion with ourselves, and we ask ourselves, what would love do in this situation? What would be the loving, compassionate answer to this? What would you tell your best friend if your best friend was saying the things that you say to yourself, all right, oh, I'm worthless, I'm useless, I always get things wrong. And you kind of turn that on yourself and you say, you're not useless. You're just going through a difficult habitual response to feeling low, to feeling rejected, or whatever it is. So you understand that most people's expressions of this, whether it's they have compulsions or addictions or difficulties forming relationships, are the best attempt that that person can manage to solve the problem. They're just dysfunctional, but that's not your fault. So you really come into alignment with the life that you could have if you were to drop that story. That's how I frame it with people. Who would you be without that story? I asked someone that question yesterday, and it was revelatory for her. Even to label it as a story, for one thing, you know, growing up in a world where perhaps the family are very dysfunctional, and that's your normality. That's what you assume everybody has to put up with. And then you grow up and you find out some families don't do that, and some families are secure and caring. But you've carried this story in your life this whole time, that this is what life is. And just to ask yourself, in safe connection with another person, who would I be without that story, is like the weight lifting. So that's my interpretation, any case, of his book. An absolute masterpiece, no doubt, an absolute masterpiece. It's beautifully written. One of the things I can tell you about this book is that this is his authentic voice. All right, as a writer myself, I always know when a book has been either ghostwritten or, let's be honest, these days, AI written. Okay, I went on a call recently for a very famous self-publishing course run by two very famous twin men, who I won't name, because I joined their group a couple of years ago to learn a little bit about self-publishing, and it is a really good course. But how they're moving forward now is they've got links to an AI program that I think they've developed internally, which will write a book for you, they claim, in a day. Okay, and so there's all these people desperate to make money, students, you know, people maybe needing a side income, people nearing retirement, whatever. We're just like, I need to write books. And the whole thing is now automated, and it researches your market, and it creates the chapter headings, and it actually writes the stuff, and you can publish. Whilst that may seem a wonderful thing, if all you're interested in is money, for a readership, I think it's soulless. It's terrible. Because the market is going to be flooded with books that have been written by computer, okay, by a computer algorithm. Now, you do get the chance to edit that, but most people will just accept it and go, yeah, publish. All right, this is not that kind of book. My book, The Scarlet One Hill, is not that kind of book. These were passion projects, and I think you can really tell Gabor has actually put his heart and soul into this. It is a magnificent book. It's taken me probably 3.5 weeks to read. Pretty much every day I've been reading some bits of it. I have extensively underlined bits, I've starred bits. I'm going to come back to this again and again and again. I think this book, highly, highly recommended. I would say one of my top 10 books for sure. His book, The Body Says No, was also in my top 10. But I think this possibly updates and extends because of the importance of the social, the biopsychosocial element, which wasn't covered in The Body Says No. So it's a really important book. Go out and get it. It's fantastic. And folks, if anything I've said today is of interest to you and you want to get in touch, you can find me on alchemytherapies.co.uk or Patricia Warby, worby.com. All right, take care, everyone. See you soon. Bye for now.